Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, we continue our series, American Comedy from Slapstick to Screwball. And boy, do we have something screwball for you today. It's the 1936 classic, My Man Godfrey, directed by Gregory LaCava and starring William Powell and Carole Lombard. It's one of the big ones, full of dialogue, full of characters, full of screwball. We'll be talking about that and other things after today's screening. It's a pleasure to have with us a CUNY colleague, Professor Elizabeth Alsop, an expert on how dialogue is used in storytelling forms. Now, take a trip to a not quite realistic Manhattan of the 1930s in My Man Godfrey. Welcome back from a New York that from 1936, but it wasn't quite the New York of 1936. You've just seen one of the most enchanting fairy tales of the Depression era and one of the great screwball comedies. We have 30 minutes to talk about it, and it's an absolute pleasure to have with us today another colleague from the CUNY system, Professor Elizabeth Alsop. Elizabeth is a professor in our School of Professional Studies. She's the author of Making Conversation in Modernist Fiction, and she's widely published on cinema and is currently working on a book on one of the great writers and directors of contemporary screwball-style comedies, Elaine May.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that's not our subject of conversation today, but go see her movies.
Absolutely. Yeah. But there is a line.
There is, absolutely.
No,
and I think that will become clear as we start to talk more about
absolutely. So I just said that this is and is not, the New York of 1936. Yeah. And I think we get a sense of that at the very beginning of the film. What about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as soon as you start watching this movie, right, the very opening credits, right, they're literally you're seeing names and lights, right? So this is a world of glamour. This is the New York of bright lights, big city. But then as the camera kind of pans over, suddenly we find ourselves in a Hooverville, in a garbage dump, right? So that juxtaposition is set up really from the beginning, I think. And what we realize, though, is that this film is not really going to be the kind of social realist parable, right? We don't spend too much time sort of in the dump, but we get that kind of established at the beginning that there is this, this is going to be at least partly unfolding in a world of glamour and glitz, and that, of course, comes to happen as soon as Carole Lombard tumbles out of a car in her literally luminous gown, right? And meets William Powell's character.
Right, and I actually did look up the address, which would be around 78th and Fifth Avenue of the family home. But I think we can refer to it as the magic castle in which all of this action is taking place.
That's right, and much has been made for those of you who don't live in New York that the address doesn't really exist, right? There is no house there, so it literally is a kind of fictitious kind of creation, a magical kind of cinematic space in some ways.
Yeah. So let's talk about the choice of characters, in the film. I mean, the cast isn't. How should I put it? The core cast isn't that large. There are large scenes which we see this, but what do you think about this group of characters?
Yeah, this ensemble, this daffy ensemble, right? So on the one hand, there's a kind of upstairs downstairs element, right, where we have the wisecracking maid Molly, who gets some of the best lines, right? I think right from the very beginning, right? I think that the cast is really, I think it's small but mighty. This is, I think, the first film to be nominated that received Oscar nominations in every acting category.
Absolutely.
Right. So I mean, you really see that kind of ensemble work come together. But yeah, there's a lot of variety within the cast. We have some characters that I think, as we were talking about, have kind of a very clear arc over the course of the film, and others who really are sort of there either more for comic relief or to kind of play some other role within the narrative. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's go in one direction with them, and then we can go in another direction with them. This is 1936. Yeah. So we're really barely a decade into sound film.
Absolutely.
And for those of us, and many of the viewers, this period of the 1930s is just so rich. But in virtually every aspect of the cinematic art. But one of the aspects is sound and voice.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you make of this ensemble and sound and voice?
Yeah, what's fascinating is, as I was rewatching this movie, which I love and have seen many times, it really struck me how central the voice is to this film, right? And that really, in some ways, although one wouldn't want to do this, one could turn off the picture and just listen to Carole Lombard and William Powell and Alice Brady, who plays the wonderfully daffy matriarch of the family, Eugene Pallett, with that kind of gravelly tuba-like voice he has. All such distinctive voices. And what struck me is, I was thinking about Norma Desmond's famous line from Sunset Boulevard, "We had faces," right? These are actors who had voices, right? They really did. And it almost could be, and I looked up on a little-known scholarly source called Wikipedia, that this film was adapted eventually into radio plays subsequently. So it does really lend, it really is driven by voice and by dialogue. What's so interesting to me, too, as someone who's written about dialogue, is that it's not even necessarily what they're saying, right? Some characters get great one-liners, but then we have lines like Carole Lombard, saying things like, "Isn't it funny how one thing makes you think of another thing?" And, it's really how she's saying it with this kind of breathlessness, this kind of sort of madcap sort of energy that really drives things along. And one thing I was reading is that she actually found it quite challenging to remember the lines because they are sort of so nonsensical, right? They don't necessarily flow one, kind of line to the other. So it's really interesting how central the kind of delivery, just the line readings and the particular vocal qualities of the actors really are, I think, to our experience of the film.
Well, and one of the things that to go back as a group into all of these actors and actresses. These are people who really, most of them had a triple career. That is, they were theatrically trained, they worked in film, but they all worked in radio as as well. And so there's, it's very famous, of course, that only a few years later, Orson Welles takes all the people he'd made so famous on radio and puts them in Citizen Kane. And that's kind of become the case that people talk about. But actually, it's just a representative case of the way in which the innovation that's going on in the 30s has to do with this marrying of everything you can do with sound and the voice, which, as you so well articulated, it includes not just delivering a line well in the sense of that very beginning of sound of like, can you understand what they're saying? But rather just the richness that comes from pacing, timbre, accent, etc.
Absolutely. And, I think it's also fascinating to think that these are actors who also made the transition from silent cinema, right? And so really, it's such we kind of take for granted, I think, almost that, oh, well, of course, Carole Lombard was always the screwball dame who could, have this, I think one critic I was looking at talked about her martial arts level breathing control, right, to deliver these kinds of speeches. But that's a real skill that, again, had to be cultivated, and not all actors did make that transition successfully to sound film.
Well, and let me just take another angle on this. This is a film, and we'll have several things to say about this. This is a film that does deal with class, even if it's in a fairy tale setting. But one of the interesting aspects of its portrayal is not only, a stark visual contrast, like the castle-like volume of the house, versus the dump, itself, and the volume of it. But not only that, but we have characters who are defined so much by their voice. Yes, there's great delivery, but if you were, and neither of us are, though we dabble in it, if you were a sociolinguist, you would know where the people come from. I mean, so even in that first encounter between William Powell and Mike, we know that William Powell is different in some way. And we already know he's William Powell. Hiding behind the beard, one of the most famous men in Hollywood is, it's like saying, gee, I think that guy's kind of like Harrison Ford. Oh, it is Harrison. Of course, it's the same effect. Beard or no beard, it's always William Powell. But still, for native speakers of North American English, you immediately know that we're talking about people who are coming from different points in this in the society.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that I think there's a scene sort of midway through the film where they're throwing one of their many parties, and Tommy Gray, one of the former Harvard classmates of the William Powell character, comes in, and William Powell knows who it is because he hears him. He's got these kind of plummy Brahmin sort of Boston tones. Of course, he went to school in Cambridge. leverage, right? And so that the way the voice tells and signifies class in that way, I think is absolutely immediate.
Well, and one of the interesting things that I think this film is representative of, but also if we look, the studios are making several hundred films a year at this point. And we're really only looking at maybe 50 films from each of these years. But some of even the prestigious films we still look at, one of the reasons they are stilted, some of it has to do with editing style, some of it has to do with framing, some of it has to do with story, but also part of it has to do with that particular studio's idea of what language should be on the screen, and the degree to which, if it's going to be a dignified motion picture, there should be some kind of North American variant of BBC English, in some way. And then there are films like this that go immediately, upstairs, downstairs, immediately go to the maid, and you're saying, that's the vitality. This smart working class woman knows how to use language, and she knows how to use the American language.
That's right. Yeah, there's some kind of interesting sort of fusion between, that sort of transatlantic accent that you hear in so much Cary Grant and all that. And then, the kind of infusion of slang even into these, and really that wonderful sort of American vernacular tradition that really kind of makes its way into these films. And it is a kind of wonderful sort of fusion that really characterizes a lot of films from this decade.
Right. Now, but let's go back to Carole Lombard. But she doesn't really quite fit on that map.
Not at all. It's like she's doing her own thing almost entirely, right? And I was reading some stuff about her biography, and one thing I was interested to learn is how strategic she was about positioning herself as the kind of screwball actress par excellence, right? She went on this whole kind of marketing campaign, I think, prior to the release of some of these films, and really tried to portray herself in the tabloids as a kind of party girl, right? Someone who actually lived the life that she was portraying on screen. And she really does kind of embody that sort of whole persona in this film so perfectly. I think it's kind of gave the name to the genre in some ways. Yeah. Right.
So let's talk a little bit about gender roles.
Yeah.
In the film, because I think this is a film that is open to, you can say, a couple of levels of reading, and I'm going to hold on to that idea for a second because I think that's also one of the things that we have happily learned about the best films of the classical Hollywood studio system. Those that keep not entertaining us, fascinating us, were always approachable on the first screening.
Yeah.
But the multiple screenings keep revealing, and sometimes we start changing our ideas about what the film is really up to, because the more you absorb it. So where I'm going to take this with this film is this film just some very light little thing that is about this ditzy dame who is the real thing that's discardable, or is there something else, more complicated things going on?
Right. This is a great question. It's a kind of question students ask too, right? Are we reading into this too much? But I think there really are so many layers here, because on the one hand, you could certainly do a reading of this film as sort of regressive in its portrayal of women. They're so airheaded, or they're petty and cruel, a la Cornelia, right? Or kind of lushes like the mother. But it's really the women who drive the plot in this movie, right? They are the agents, and it struck me rewatching this how the men really are forced into this kind of rearguard position of just reacting to the women all the time, right? Whether it's Misha, the mother's protege, aka gigolo, we think, or the long-suffering father of the family, or William Powell himself, right, who suffers himself to get kissed, right, by Carole Lombard, who is very much the sexual aggressor here. And so, I think that sometimes I teach a class on film noir, and sometimes students have kind of challenged the idea that the Femme Fatales really are these progressive characters because they seem so negative in some ways on screen. But that kind of agency for female characters it does have a kind of power and force to it, I think. And we can't really look away from Carole Lombard anytime she's on screen. At least I can't. So she's really directing the film in a lot of ways.
That brings us back to a lot of. Actually, I would say a broad range of thought that's actually going on in the academy these days in a number of ways of, wait a minute, maybe our notions about agency in particular kinds of situations has been far more limited, and we should step outside of this discourse of binary oppositions. We should step out of this discourse of who's the victim or all of this, and really examine what these kind of multiple channels of agency are. And, you know, yours is an excellent point. First of all, she's a kind of master linguist in the film.
Really?
I mean, she's spinning language around everybody, and that. And we see later, I mean, we see in the interplay between her and William Powell, where he's getting it now.
Yeah.
He says, wait a minute, I'm dealing with someone who's far more cunning and far less innocent than I thought. She has a whole way of doing things, and so that's, you know, he's looking at her in the mirror. He's kind of calling her cards, you know, on this, but that doesn't mean that she's defeated. That doesn't mean that she's stopping.
No, I think absolutely. And there is this, you know, she's running a kind of a good game on him, right? I mean, she does sort of, you know, her machinations are successful. But to your point, I mean, I think it's really interesting. You know, Stanley Cavell has written about kind of, you know, the comedy of remarriage in particular is this way of sort of renegotiating a kind of, you know, new parity between the sexes in a way. And we see that here literally sort of evoked. Both characters routinely say things like, I think it's particularly Carol Lombard who says, I want to do something for you because you did something for me, right? And he says the same thing. So there is this kind of equality that she might seem like some ditzy dame, right? But there is a way in which they are equals, right? And that she does, at least, I think, if she doesn't have quite the moral authority of the William Powell character, she is generous, open-minded, ethically much less objectionable than the other members of her family.
Right. I would say, to use the phrase, it's a kind of negotiated reciprocity that in the end the film settles on, and that's what's been going on. It's been not quite as airheaded as it all seemed.
Yeah, and you know, I think you raised a really good point. You know, I think about this a lot in teaching too. Sometimes, and no fault of theirs, students come in with a kind of presentist idea that things were bad then, sexist, regressive, and now they're better. Right, and actually, it's more complicated, and you know, I think it can be hard to take a work of art and say, is this, you know, progressive? Is this conservative? Right? Usually, it's some combination of both.
Well, and once again, this is a film that really knows how to deal with the production code.
Yes, that's
it's
right.
2 years after the production code has gone into place, and there's all kinds of racy things that are not supposed to be happening. But you know, there are, well, you know, she had a headache and so she didn't do that. No. I have and all of a sudden, manifestly they're talking about menstruation, or the fact that the Eugene Pallett character is about to beat William Powell up because he assumes that he's
had
moved in with
sex with his daughter.
Absolutely. So the film manages to get, and then again, yes, this whole notion that the protege, who's the great artist, who then revealed to be the great mimic of an ape.
Yes.
Which is, by the way, we've got to give a lot of credit to Misha Auer, one of the great character actors of the era, that he does a really good monkey.
Really good ape impression. Yeah, and actually I think he's the occasion for one of my favorite sort of lines of Innuendo, which is when I think Alice Brady says something like, stop eating the hors d'oeuvres and get in the mood. Get in the mood to do the ape impression. But, you know, clearly the line it suggests something else, right? And so there is such a pleasure, you know, in not only just rewatching these movies, but re-listening to them. Because you do catch all of these, you know, these double entendres that you may have missed. Some of them are kind of throwaway lines almost.
Well, and that also has to do with one of the ways in which these films were very modern at their time and continue to be is that this in many aspects. Some of it is just the pacing of bodily movement. Some of it is the clip of the editing. But much of it is the fact you have great pleasure in this, but you need to follow this because they are breathlessly negotiating things in this. In this.
Often while doing all kinds of other physical comedy, washing dishes, drying dishes, moving through space. Absolutely. My students, sometimes we talk about, you know, a devastating insult is that something's a phone show, which meaning you're on your phone while you're watching it.
Right.
These are not phone movies. You need to pay attention to this, right? Or you're going to miss basically the whole plot. You're going to miss a significant glance or a line of dialogue or, you know, even just a stunning gown, right?
All of the above. So stunning gowns.
Yes.
I think only rich people have stunning gowns.
I've never had a stunning gown in my life, so I'm led to believe that's true. Yes.
Okay, so that's also one of the interesting features of this film. This is this is a film we began by talking about. Our first scene is in Hooverville.
Yep.
Okay, I mean these are people living amid garbage. And then we have what we've already called the magic castle of the house. So what do you make of the storytelling problem here that, faced by the scriptwriters, faced by Gregory LaCava as he's directing the ensemble? How do you handle comedy in this kind of situation of extreme socioeconomic crisis? What do you think some of the strategies of the film are?
I think that's such a great and rich question, Jerry. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I mean, one is that, as you point out, it does present a problem in the sense that there's a kind of delicacy right here that one has to be, and I think this film really treads a very fine line between kind of sentimentalizing the poor. We have these seemingly very, dignified kind of hobos who are choosing to live, in the kind of shanty town. But it is also, I think, an interesting opportunity, that this kind of context presents. And one thing I was thinking about as I was watching it is how the film's kind of rhythms and its narrative structure in a way really, it opens itself up to all kinds of contingencies and zigzags and swerves. And suddenly Carole Lombard will faint, or she'll burst into tears, or she'll ride a horse into the house. And in some ways, that seems to speak to the cultural moment, right? Okay. This is an era in which people's livelihoods had been completely, destroyed overnight, right? The stock market crashes and that's it, right? Your life is topsy-turvy. It's completely turned upside down. So that idea of just kind of radical contingency almost seems to find its way into the structure of this film. Not only this film, I think a lot of screwball films, but this is a film that really does try to deal directly with the depression in some way. And it seems like one way it does that is to normalize the idea that things can change for the worse, but also for the better, right? Prosperity is just around the corner, right? And in fact, it turns out sort of to be the case the moment that a character utters that. These rich people pull up in a car and change William Powell's life, right? So that's one sort of line of thought I have about that question.
Well, also, there's a way in which, you can very easily make all the rich people into villains of the most, profound kind. And again, a fellow, humanist populist filmmaker like Frank Capra will have, in a number of instances, he'll have the kind of evil person who really doesn't understand what's happening here. And so what's interesting about this film is there really are no villains here.
That's a great point. Yeah, there's no like Mr. Potter, right?
Well, exactly.
There's not, and you're absolutely right. I was thinking about how sort of auspicious this conversation is, because this does feel like a moment when we're witnessing kind of a resurgence of sort of class satires, and these kind of eat the rich movies like Glass Onion or White Lotus on television, or even Triangle of Sadness. People really seem like there was an appetite to villainize the rich on screen, but this film really resists that impulse. And I think it does. I'm looking at a picture of Jean Renoir behind us. I don't know if everyone has their reasons, but they kind of have their reasons. Well, they might not be great reasons, but they're...
No, I think that's very much the case. And there's also the people who are kind of accepted in the film world. They are going to be who they are. Right. They can be moved around on the chessboard of society by others. And then there are people, who are redeemable in any number of ways. And we don't know for a very long time in the film what the real background of the William Powell character is. We know he's ended up there. That speaks to your point about contingency very, very well. But then we find out that he's made this charge about these nitwits, etc., and how they're narcissism and they can't really step out of this. And that, of course, is it turns out in the film is self-recognition.
Yes,
that he comes from a class and that he can actually be part of an attempt to transform that class. And that's the thing that's happened to him through this encounter.
That's right. And it's interesting because when he delivers that kind of devastating takedown of the rich and the scavenger hunt, which is a wonderful scene, his call is kind of taken up by someone else who says, I've been wanting to say that all night, right? So there is this idea that some of the rich are redeemable. They're not universally, to be you know, just detested. And that this idea that I think maybe is the most utopian element of the film,
Right.
that contact between these classes will occasion some kind of positive change, right? Even if in the end we still mostly see the rich just slumming it at the dump, the hot new bar that he set up. But there is this kind of at least sort of like whiff of again, fairy tale fantasy, this idea that there is some solution to the class war.
Right, and what one must say, there is the satisfaction of also creating, on the part of the spectator, the Depression spectator, that there is this other world.
That's right.
That other world hasn't been fully destroyed, and that in a certain sense it sets an aspirational agenda.
Yep. And it also, I think, interestingly suggests, I mean, I think this is the other pleasure maybe for a working class audience, that the rich are pretty dopey, right?
Well,
I mean,
yeah, that's right.
and they're constantly analogized to animals, right? The lioness is upstairs, there's her cub, right? There's a horse in the library, you know, acting like a gorilla, all of those things. So they really are kind of a zoo, right? And so there's maybe a way in which the viewer is invited to feel a little superior to this family, right? You know, I think there's a certain pleasure.
And that's all part of its what I'm calling its humanist populism.
Yes, I think that's
and one should understand that the 30s is different. The 30s of the 20th century is different from the 20s of the 21st century, because there was a full-blown stridency of class warfare.
Yep.
In all of the media at this particular time, and we forget how many sectors of the left and splinter groups were represented very vocally in the press, you know, at this particular moment. So there's a way in which, you know, this is saying, wait, let's see if we can develop other ways of dealing. Now, to be sure, it is developed in a manner that is fairy tale like, you know, etc. And there is no, you know, there's a local solution that comes kind of magically from the bad act of the jewelry. He gets the investment capital, which, you know, it stays in the hands of individuals. So you're not endorsing FDR's, you know, intrusionist policies or anything. But you're saying, well, wait a minute, coming back to agency, we have different forms of agency to make change.
That's right. And I think that, you know, we see, again, it might be a little facile or kind of, you know, lighthearted, but, you know, these sort of gestures towards sort of solidaristic action, right? So Carol Lombard and Molly embracing over their shared love of William Powell, right? So upstairs and downstairs come together, right? You know,
okay, we're gonna have to come to an end on that note of coming
together. Perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you've liked what we were talking about here and like to know more about City Cinematheque, there's a way to do so. Visit the website of CUNY TV, www.tv.cuny.edu. You'll find all the programming for this show, but also for the entire station. You'll also find all the instruments for communicating with us, and please do so. So visit www.tv.cuny.edu. Elizabeth, thank you for an invigorating, fun piece of conversation for the last 30 minutes or so. Always a pleasure to talk about these things with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Jerry. It was a pleasure.
Okay. And thank you for joining us here today on City Cinematheque. And please come back in the future as we continue to stroll through the archives of film history. But for today, it's goodbye.